Thank you for joining us for our August Arkansas Valley Audubon Society program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the InfoZone Museum at the Rawlings Library. We are fortunate to have Sarah Herod joining us this evening. Sarah grew up near San Antonio, Texas, and was introduced to birdwatching by a neighbor while in high school. She attended Texas A&M University and earned a Bachelor of Science in Zoology. She went on to study songbirds while earning a Master's of Science in Wildlife Ecology from Texas State University and a PhD in Environmental Sciences from Arkansas State University. She is now a natural resource specialist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at John Martin Reservoir, where she assists with piping Plover, an interior lease tern monitoring program, and conducts public outreach. Dr. Peg Rooney is also joining us live this evening. She is president of the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society and the creator for this series of monthly programs. Thank you, Peg, for your continued efforts to bring us great content, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Megan. I want to welcome you all here tonight and remind you that on Monday, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a code red for humanity, telling us that there are going to be more severe natural disasters, planetary changes due to human disturbance. We've lost 3 billion birds since the 70s due to habitat destruction, human development, and climate change. And birds are an indicator of the health of the planet, and we just got a code red. Now, it would be easy to sit back and throw up our hands and say, oh my God, isn't that terrible? Oh, well, too bad. But what would be better is if we did something. There are wonderful organizations out there who are fighting for the environment, fighting for wildlife, fighting for birds and habitat protections. The Center for Biological Diversity, the Environmental Defense Fund, Wild Earth Guardians, the National Audubon Society, and your local Audubon chapter, Arkansas Valley Audubon. We serve all of southern Colorado and the San Luis Valley. And we have membership information on our website, Southern Colorado Birds, and it's abbreviated SOCO. So socobirds.org. And I would encourage you to join us, to do something. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and the Army Corps of Engineers because they are doing something. Sarah.
Before we get started, I do want to give a little bit of an outline. So first, I'm going to just talk a little bit about John Martin Reservoir for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with it. Talk a little bit about the piping plovers and the interior least terns, some of the conservation efforts that the Corps is engaged in, what you as a visitor can do to help. And at the end, we can take some questions if you have any. So the plovers and terns at John Martin need your help, but first you might be wondering, where is John Martin Reservoir? So from Pueblo, it's actually about 100 miles to the southeast, right down here. It's known as the Sapphire on the Plains, because as you can see, it's this little bit of blue and a vast area of brown. So the Corps of Engineers owns the reservoir, but the lands around it are leased and licensed to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And so if you come to visit us, you'll notice we do have a state park as well, and we work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to help manage and protect the land. John Martin is a great place if you love bird watching or wildlife viewing. We have 312 species of birds that have been documented here across a variety of habitats. Over here on the left, these are just a couple of photos that our rangers have taken. Like I said, it's also great just for viewing wildlife in general. We have a lot of really unique species out here. And we also have some species of concern, such as bald eagles, eastern black rails, and the two that I'm going to be talking about today, the piping plover and interior least tern. All right, so talking about piping plovers now. They are a shorebird. This is an adult piping plover in breeding plumage. Some of the key diagnostic features for identifying them are this sandy colored back, this black band that they have between their eyes, which I kind of think of as like a unibrow, the orange beak with the little black tip at the end, the black collar that goes around the neck, and the orange legs. We do have some other similar species out here. The first is the snowy plover. They are also here during the breeding season. The easiest way to tell them apart from the piping plovers is that they have a black bill, and they've also got this little black smudge right behind their eye. There's also semi-palmated plovers, which look very similar to piping plovers at first glance, but their back is a little bit darker than a piping plover's, and they also have a lot more black around their face. And then finally, we have the killdeer. They are quite a bit larger than piping plovers, and they also have these two black bands that go around their neck. So piping plovers are very small shorebirds. This is one in non-breeding plumage next to a water bottle for size comparison. So they're actually quite a bit smaller than people may think. There are 3 distinct breeding populations across the U.S. The first is the Northern Great Plains population, which John Martin is a part of. There's also a population up in the Great Lakes region and one on the Atlantic coast. And so in the fall, after the birds are done nesting, they fly south and typically winter along the southeastern U.S. coast and the Gulf of Mexico area. Their diet primarily consists of small insects, worms, crustaceans, other little invertebrates like that. And to find them, they employ what's known as the peck and run strategy that you'll see a lot of other shorebirds engage in. They have some interesting territorial and courtship behaviors. One of my favorites is what I call the charge. It's where the bird puts his head down and kind of puffs up and runs at another bird or an intruder. I do have a little video demonstrating that. So it must look very, very intimidating to another bird. I think it's adorable. So they tend to nest on sandy or pebbly beaches and what's called a scrape, which is basically just a little shallow bowl dug in the sand, and this may or may not be lined with pebbles. Now, these are really easy to overlook. If you're looking in this photo right here, if you're walking along the beach and you saw this, you might not think twice, but this is actually a scrape right here, where a plover will eventually lay its eggs. One of the interesting courtship behaviors that males will engage in to attract a female's attention is called pebble throwing. And it's exactly like it sounds like. The male just picks up pebbles and throws them around and tries to impress a female doing that. And then my personal favorite is marching, which is this really stiff-legged walk that males will do to try to get the female's attention. So on average, 4 eggs are laid in a nest. And just like with the nest themselves, these are very, very easy to overlook. So in this photo here, there's actually 4 eggs right there. They just blend in extremely well with the ground and the pebbly substrate around them. When the chicks hatch, they are what's known as precocial, which means that unlike a lot of other birds, they're hatched fully feathered, their eyes are open, they can move around, and they'll actually go down to the shoreline with their parents and look for food. When a predator, or as the case may be, a person comes too close to the nest, the adults will engage in another interesting behavior called the broken wing display. And this is essentially where the bird acts like it has a broken wing. And the idea is that if you're an actual predator who's coming for the eggs or the chicks, you see this and think, this is an easy meal. I'm going after this bird, and you lead the predator away from your nest. So piping plovers were first protected under the Endangered Species Act in 1986. At the federal level, all the populations are listed as threatened, with the exception of the Great Lakes population that is endangered. Piping plovers are also protected in the state of Colorado and listed as threatened. And fortunately, since they were listed under the Endangered Species Act, populations have steadily increased. So switching gears a little bit to talk about the interior least terns. They are also shorebirds, but they look quite a bit different. So they have this nice black head. There's a white mark kind of on the forehead. And when you look at them head on, it actually looks like an upside down triangle. And then their bill and legs are this bright yellow color. There are some other similar species, but not quite as tricky as with the plovers. We have Caspian terns, Forster's terns, and black terns that are also here in the breeding season with the least terns. The Caspian and Forster's terns have all black heads, though. Their beaks are orange, and the black tern is just overall a darker grayish and black color. And all three of these species are also quite a bit larger than the least tern. Least terns are also very small. There's one next to an adult human hand for size comparison. They breed along the coast of the United States as well as inland along rivers and reservoirs. And that's actually where the term interior comes in, is it refers to this unique subpopulation that doesn't breed along the coast. At the end of the breeding season, they also fly south to the Caribbean and Bahamas, and some of them will even go as far away as the coast of Brazil. Unlike the plovers that tend to forage along the shoreline, these guys actually dive in the water to catch small fish. They use more or less the same habitat as piping plovers, but one of the interesting things that they may employ is what's called furniture. And this can be something like a piece of driftwood or a rock or a plant. And the purpose of it is that it helps them to find their way back to the nest when they're in the air and coming back from catching fish. On average, 3 eggs are laid. Unlike the plovers, which do the broken wing display, terns like to take things on the offensive and will actually dive bomb predators. In some cases, they'll actually poop or defecate on predators as well. So kind of best to give them their space during nesting season. And when the chicks hatch, they are called semi-precocial, which means that like the plovers, they're hatched with their eyes open and fully feathered, but they can't move around as well, and they're still very much dependent on their parents for food and protection. These guys were listed in 1985 under the Endangered Species Act as endangered, and they were actually delisted in February of this year, so they are a conservation success story. They are still considered endangered, though, in the state of Colorado. And as with the piping plovers, the populations have steadily increased since being protected federally. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the conservation efforts that the Corps and our partners are engaged in. The monitoring project that we have going on actually began in 1990. And it's a collaborative effort between the Corps of Engineers, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So some of the nationwide threats facing these species, it's primarily habitat loss that can occur a couple of different ways. The first is through altered shorelines, like when dams are built and they alter the flow of the river. Human development, if you build a series of condos on a beach, then this is not something that the birds can use anymore. And the last one, which is more of an issue out at John Martin, is invasive species, namely this shrub or small tree called tamarisk. And it was actually introduced in the 1800s to control erosion along riverbanks, and unfortunately, it has spread across the western United States. And what happens is you may start with only a few plants, but eventually you get to where that's all you have. It crowds out other species, and it will, in our case, take over the shoreline and render it unavailable to the birds to use. There's also human disturbances, which obviously includes people. So plovers, terns, and people like to use the same areas. People like to recreate on the beaches that the birds often choose to nest on. So if you have an area like this shown here, where it's lots of people, it's highly unlikely that you will find any birds there. Another issue is that when people come to the beach, oftentimes they bring their dogs, which is not in itself a problem unless they're off leash. So off-leash dogs will chase birds, and they can also inadvertently trample nest, crush eggs and chicks, etc. There's always the issue of predators, some of which are native and some of which have been introduced. And now we'll talk about the issues that are more relevant here at John Martin. So like I said, human disturbance is a big one because there is that almost that same preference for the same areas that people like to recreate at and the birds like to breed at. What it really comes down to is that the eggs and chicks are very hard to see. And so if you're walking along the beach, you might see there's 2 adult least terns here. But what you might not see is that there's these 2 chicks here that blend in extremely well. And so if you're not paying attention, you can inadvertently step on them. It's the same case for the piping plovers. Their chicks blend in very well with the ground. And they also have a defense mechanism where when a predator or threat approaches them, they freeze in place. Which, doesn't work if there's a person walking towards you. So, like I said before, just the presence of people and off-leash dogs can scare parents away. It can prevent them from finding food for their chicks or sitting on eggs or even just trying to find food for themselves. One of the other issues is that loss of habitat due to tamarisk and fluctuating conditions. So oftentimes what you'll see in an area that is recently settled by tamarisk is something like this, where you have just a couple of little saplings, and then you'll get to something like this where it's big and it just takes over and now you can't hardly see the ground and you can see how dark it is in there. There's also issues with predation from coyotes, gulls, and snakes that will prey on plover and tern eggs and chicks. So sometimes people ask us, why are these birds important? Why should we be working to protect the population at John Martin Reservoir? And to answer that, I find the easiest thing to do is to look at the range map for these species. And if you do, and look at where John Martin's located, you can see how vulnerable that populations really are. They're relatively small, they're isolated from other populations, and what that means is that the population has the potential to crash very quickly, and if that happens, it's very hard to recover. These populations are also important for the overall genetic diversity of the species. So it's best if we can conserve them and not get to the point to where we're losing the birds. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the specific actions that we are doing. I'm going to go over these just very briefly, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. The first thing is shoreline closures, bird banding, bird monitoring, habitat improvement, and public outreach and education. So starting with shoreline closures, Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Corps of Engineers will close portions of the shoreline to protect the birds from people and off-leash dogs. What we'll do is put these T-posts and signs out, and you don't see it in this picture because we hadn't put it up yet, but we also have brightly colored twine that interconnects these signs and just, lets the public know that this portion of the shoreline is closed. The shoreline closures are temporary. When the birds leave in August or maybe September even, they will come down and that area is open to people again. One thing we've started doing is if there's going to be a large scale closure, then we will advertise that to the public so that hopefully if they're planning a visit out here, they can see that this area down here is closed, and it's not a surprise when they get to the area and they've planned on camping out here. We also use individual nest cages. What these are is they just sit right over the top of the nest, and the openings are big enough for an adult plover to go in and out, but it will keep out some of the larger predators like gulls, raccoons, and coyotes. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about bird banding. So this is done through the U.S. Geological Survey, and they band adults as well as chicks. Plovers and terns will both get a little silver band that has a unique serial number on it. The plovers also get what's called a flag. Ours are blue, and they have this nice little, usually it's a 3-digit code on it that makes it very easy to identify that individual. Terns get another band that's orange in color, and this also has a short code on it. So bird banding allows us to estimate the survival of the population, which birds that are hatched at the reservoir are coming back year to year, how long they're living, all those things. The bird monitoring program, which is the crux of what we do. So during the breeding season, the Corps of Engineers and Colorado Parks and Wildlife will record the location of the nest, how many eggs and chicks are there, how long they've been incubating, whether the nests are successful or not, as well as the IDs of the parents. If you're familiar with resighting studies, you probably know that you can use binoculars or a spotting scope to view the bands on a bird. That is true for the plovers as well, not so much terns, but sometimes the easiest thing to do is to put out these little video cameras next to the nest. And so what it is you just set them down about a foot or so away from the nest bowl. And if you're lucky, what'll happen is one or both of the parents will come back to incubate the egg, and then you get a nice little shot of that band there, and you know who that individual is. Another technique that we use sometimes is called egg floating. This is used in the case of, say you find a plover nest that already has 4 eggs in it, and you don't know when the first egg was laid, and so you also don't know when it's going to hatch. With egg floating, what you do is you put the egg in a little cup of water, and then we have a handy little chart that tells us where that egg is in its development phase based on where it's floating in the water column. All right, habitat improvement. So as I've mentioned, I think 2 or 3 times now, tamarisk is a big problem out here, and it is an issue for the birds because it takes away potential breeding habitat. The Arkansas River watershed has a very high concentration of tamarisk, and actually compared to other watersheds in Colorado has the highest percentage. And in fact, John Martin Reservoir itself has the highest concentration of tamarisk in the entire state. So it is something that we are trying to work on. It's a very big battle, but as you can see, it's very important to keep those nesting areas open for the birds. The last thing I wanted to talk about with conservation efforts is public outreach and education. One of the things that I've started this year is an annual newsletter. It's hopefully the first in a continuing series, but this is available at the Army Corps of Engineers John Martin Reservoir website. And this has a little bit of information about the birds. It also talks about some of those conservation efforts and why we have shoreline closures. And I've also put some interesting little facts in there about some of the individual birds, like how long pairs have been partnered together, how many chicks they've raised, etc. Our website has also been updated with more or less an entire page dedicated to the plovers and terns, with educating people. And we have also worked on trying to increase our social media presence on our Facebook page, and not just post educational things, but also some kind of fun and informative facts. One of the things that I would like to get going is doing activities or presentations to various school groups, and not just necessarily a presentation like I'm giving now, but some type of hands-on activities that kids can participate in and that can help them better understand the issues that these birds are facing. And the last thing is I'd like to continue doing public presentations such as this, and just getting the word out about the birds, and like I said, helping people to understand why we take certain actions that we do, and get people excited about the fact that we have these species here. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the things that you as a visitor can do if you visit the reservoir. The first is, if you visit during the breeding season in the spring or summer and you see these shoreline closures, is don't go in them. Like I said, that's really to protect the birds, because you can very easily step on a nest and crush eggs or chicks and not even know it, because they blend in so well. If you do see someone go back there, you can always call the rangers, and we'll go and talk to them and just kind of explain why that area is closed. Next big thing is pick up your trash. And I'm sure that everyone does this, but it can be harmful for the birds. Those small microplastics can end up in the chicks and kill them. Food waste as well can be a problem, because it can attract predators such as coyotes and raccoons to the nest site and put the chicks and eggs in danger. And it can also be hazardous to people as well. So, if you use the mantra, pack in, pack out, and that helps to keep the shoreline clean. Going back to dogs again, dogs are welcome at the reservoir, but we do ask that you keep them on a leash. I've explained kind of already how this helps protect the birds, but it's also safer for your dog as well, because we do have rattlesnakes and coyotes and other things out here. So this is also benefiting your dog. And just spreading the word about these birds, whether it's in person or following us on our Facebook page and sharing those posts, and just kind of helping us to get the message out there. Now, I do have two little plugs to go into. We have some upcoming volunteer opportunities that are both focused on tamarisk removal. The first is National Public Lands Day, which is organized through the National Environmental Education Foundation. And this year it's going to be September 25th, which is a Saturday. We have fee-free coupons available for the first 20 participants, And what those are is it's essentially like a free one-day pass into participating federal sites. That doesn't just include core properties, it also includes national parks as well. So the more information and the sign-up link is at this URL. I know that's not very easy to memorize. So if you go to nefusa.org, they have a feature where you can search for events near you. And if you search for John Martin or look in the southeastern Colorado area, you'll find us. If you do decide to come, we would ask that you sign up so that we can have an accurate head count of volunteers. And you'll need to bring work gloves, a chainsaw, hacksaw, or loppers, plenty of water. I would also recommend sunscreen because the sun gets pretty intense out here, and a lunch. And the next event is with Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado. This one is going to be October 16th and 17th, kind of working in the same area, doing the same thing. And again, here is the sign up link, but if you can't screenshot this or remember it, then you just go to voc.org. And again, they have a search feature where you can find us on there. We can also host private events if there's an organization or a group of individuals out there who would like to come and volunteer with us, but these dates don't work. So you can always just contact us via email or phone, and we can schedule something through there. Oh, I'll ahead myself. So as a thank you to volunteers, we do have a couple of tours that we can provide, COVID permitting. The first is a birding tour, because as I said, this is a great place to go birding. The next one is we can take you on a tour of our petroglyphs. These are actually prehistoric petroglyphs that are thousands of years old. It's really neat to kind of just walk through here and see these little petroglyphs and pictographs. And the last tour is actually a tour inside the John Martin Dam. And it's pretty neat to walk around in there and learn the history of it and see how it works. So that is all I have. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Sarah, thank you so much. I learned a lot about birds that I didn't even know were on the shoreline. So thank you so much for that. And we do have some questions for you.
Okay.
So the first one is, how many breeding pairs of least terns are at the John Martin Reservoir?
So I assume that's for this year. I believe this year we only had 3, maybe 4, but we, in the past couple of years, have had more breeding pairs of piping plovers than the least terns.
And how long have you been counting or keeping track?
Like me personally, or is the project?
The project, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the project's been going since 1990.
Wow.
So banding actually only started in 2017. So we do have records of how many nests, we have per year. As far as breeding pairs, if you don't have bird banding, it's hard to tell if they're the same individuals or not. So.
And how many of the piping plovers did you have?
This year, I think we had about 15 or so.
Oh.
So.
Is that typical to have more
plovers than terns, or it has been in recent years?
Oh. And then the next question is what is the John Martin website address?
It's a great question. I'm actually going to look that up right now. I kind of just have it bookmarked, but is there a way I can post it in the chat?
Yeah, you can definitely post it in the chat after, and we can get to it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see. We can post it in there because it's a little bit of a mouthful, that URL.
Right. Yeah, it's probably easier just to be able to click on it. There was another question of the interior least terns have been delisted, and why was that?
They're considered recovered at this point at the nationwide level, to the point where they don't need those extra protections under the Endangered Species Act. They are still protected in individual states can have their own, what's the word I'm looking for? Their own listings. So like in Colorado, they're still considered endangered here. And regardless, they are all protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act as well. So
That's great. And the last question is, have people been cooperative with the shoreline closures?
for the most part this year, I know in the past there have been a couple of issues. I don't think we've had any this year. I would like to think that's because we're getting the word out and letting people know about them, and then also explaining why we have these. So, but my understanding is most people, when you talk to them, they're very understanding of it, and
Well, they're pretty cute birds, so
yeah,
I hope people would want to protect them. So
yeah, absolutely.
And then we also had one comment too that was that they learned so much from you. So thank you so much for doing this.
Okay.
And I agree with that. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to talk about them. Like, so we're just trying to get the word out and let people know about this program and why this place is so special. And we have these birds. So.
Are there other places in Colorado that also have them?
There are. So there's a couple other reservoirs. I know there's like another reservoir nearby that has had them in the past. I don't think there's been any seen this year. I don't know that they breed, but I know they have at least been sighted in some areas north of John Martin Reservoir. But
Do you have a lot of people come specifically to the reservoir to see them?
Not really. We get a lot of people who come here for boating and fishing because the fishing is quite good out here. So that's something that I've been reaching out to local Audubon chapters and, letting them know about, and also saying, next spring, because the birds are about to leave, next spring, we might be able to organize a tour, and obviously you have to keep the bird safety in mind first and foremost, but that is something we can do, is have people come out and just kind of see the reservoir and see where the birds are.
Yeah, it'd be great to see the birds in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions, so thank you so much.
Okay.
And everybody watching, have a good evening.
Okay. Did you want me to post that link somewhere? Or
If you have that, you can post it in the comments either now or later.
Okay.
It'll appear on there.
Okay.
If you've got it handy, then
yeah,
in the comments
I just
section.
sent it. Is it showing up in the?
Oh, yes. Let me. And so I'm posting it right now, so you should be able to see it on both YouTube and Facebook. So people should have it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. You have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye.